Greetings, ladies and gents, and welcome to the batch video for the web novel Thieves Dungeon from the website Royal Road. This video will contain chapters 1.25 to 1.28, and as always, I hope that you enjoy. Chapter 1.25 Fortifications. Argent awoke in a warm amber light, suspended and weightless. It was divinely comfortable. Stretching her limbs, she felt amazing, invigorated. There was not the tiniest shred of exhaustion in her entire being. Instead, energy suffused her form, urging her to move on, to break free of the containment. It was fading, the light giving way and depositing her into the grassy floor of the gardens. She was reborn, and all around her was in chaos, blood, dying creatures, and dead intruders. It figures. She looks away for one moment, and the Maker is in trouble. Personally, she chose to blame the human in the corner. In her experience, this was definitely the human's fault. Argent wiggled her nose. It was strange. She could feel the Maker's thoughts, as usual, but there was more now. There was, You have consumed a powerful soul and created blessing of the Steel Dancer, born of the true warrior's spirit. The blessing grants increased intelligence and grace, as well as an affinity with blades. I was quite pleased, even before the message popped in to inform me that I claimed the blessing as an added prize. Out of the 10 invaders, a single survivor and a single captive, 8 souls devoured, a sure fit of mana to reap from the dead. Already my minions had torn into the corpses, eager to get their taste of flesh before I consumed the lion's share. Even if they could survive off mana alone, the urge and the desire to feed remained, and they were adorably bloodthirsty critters all. Even the fishman spiders, who'd had such a poor showing today, wanted to kill. Yes, they wanted to rip and tear. I beamed approving waves of warm emotion through the whole dungeon. They had done well today. And Argent was gorgeous. Her coat was the color of true silver now, and a misty, clinging haze of light followed her as she moved, making her look exactly like the moon on a cloudless night. But, incredibly, the connection to her mind, I could now hear her thoughts and every one of the rats in my dungeon. It was awe-inspiring, like a web of thoughts, the vast interconnection in which individual minds existed like islands in a sea of emotion and memory. Waves washing against one little outcropping of individuality to the next whenever a particularly strong thought filled one mind. It was slightly difficult to describe or envision, but it seemed natural to her, taking her no effort to soar through the sea of noise, to squeak, and to hear the one mind or another within the crowd. And it wasn't just thoughts. Their mana too was interlinked, allowing her to draw from any of the rats within her coven. I could sense the power of magic within her, although I couldn't yet tell what it would become. The sun was the power of fortune and fate and a singular shining heroes. The moon was the many, the masses, the luckless. She commanded her horde to come out, to search the invaders for trinkets and gems. I left their clothes and possessions behind as I devoured the flesh within. Even with all of the little chunks my creations had taken, the mana flooding through me was immense, enough to reach overflow. Not once, but twice. Everything blacked out as a vortex began to form, pulling the ethereal mana that defined my domain inwards. A long moment of total sensory silence. When I returned to consciousness, a flaming soul shard hung in the air, and a notification hovered within my sea of consciousness. You have created reincarnation of jewels. In life, the soul was a jeweler, entranced by the beauty of gems. They spent their life polishing and cutting with loving care. For this true devotion, they had been preserved through the death and called to your dungeon core to serve. A jeweler? Of all the things I needed from my human realms, a jeweler was second only to someone who could teach me proper spellcraft. The soul hung in the air, breathtakingly brilliant, but invisible to human eyes, and I found that I could manipulate it by warping my mana around the tiny flame. I knew precisely what I was going to do with it. A nacre spider that I'd given a shard was returning, whoring me with a silk-wrapped gift. and pressed the flaming soul into its skull, the spider stopped and dropped its wriggling parcel, and swayed as it stood, slowly lifting onto its hindquarters to paw at the air its two front legs. Then it caught sight of how thin and how inhuman its legs were, how they were coated in thin layers of hardened pearlescent spittle that turned them into deadly blades. My view inside the Nacra spider's mind was hilarious, because in that moment the human consciousness was waking up to discover itself inside a body of an enormous spider. And, like most humans, it had been born with an aesthetic sense to appreciate the eight-legged form. In fact, this particular human was terrified of spiders. I watched with great amusement as the spider thrashed and flailed, trying to escape its own skin. At the same time, the mind of the spider was still there, slowly melding with the human, granting them new instincts, new and arachnid ways of thinking. It was like watching an oil mixed with water. The human would probably be slightly mad by the end of being mentally grafted to its own worst nightmare. I took pity on it. I had the mana stored up already, and a slight push from me was enough to trigger its evolution. Amber light encased the two struggling minds and pushed them into placid dreams while they slowly fused together. Hopefully, they would keep my new acquisition from totally cracking under the pressure. One of the fisherman's spiders had also reached their threshold and retreated into the quiet den of experienced transformation. I would tend to them in a moment's time. For now, I had to focus on restoring my dungeon to readiness, reseeding populations and reforming mangrove orchards. I began to work. Clearly, there were improvements to be made. The fisherman spiders needed an ally in the mangrove orchards, and the jewel spiders and his real fish weren't quite up to the task. I could use a fast, deadly assailant to chase down the fleeing invaders. If I wanted to avoid escapees like the old dwarf, I had plenty to do. But I chose to focus on the rats. With Argent's evolution, every rat in my dungeon had received a massive upgrade, nearly equivalent to a shard. Only a small amount of modification was needed to make them into a formidable force. I started with a black rat, a brawny little bull of a rodent with a surly temper that I had admired. I gave him a modification that I'd used before. On my short-lived falcon, I added the hooked talon at the back of its forepaws and contained a tiny venom sac, and poured mana into intensifying the toxins within until they could cause serious harm to a human. Next, I went to work on the white rat, one of my very first creations, one that had survived since the beginning of the dungeon through the flood of the constant cycles of prey and predator. A veteran, I made her even more capable of survival by turning her bones soft, allowing her to squeeze through the tiniest of cracks. I gave her padded sucker feet inspired by the lizards within my territory, allowing her to climb straight up sheer surfaces. And finally, I made her tail longer and prehensile, adding a tiny sheen of sticky mucus that would allow her to pick things up easily. My final addition would be amongst the most delicate creations. I didn't take an already existing creature to modify it, but spun one out of a whole cloth, manifesting it with pure mana to take on my desired form. Mostly rats, yes, but with a hint of spider. It had 8 legs cloaked in chitin, and several overlapping plates of shiny black stuff ran down its back. Thinner and more streamlined than its kin, it looked almost centipedal. And it had, in the place of a tail, an abdomen with a spinneret. A weaving rat, a rat that could create bridges, rappling lines, whatever the ratty crew required. It was not, I had to admit, the prettiest creation. But if I had any necessary body parts, I would be patting myself on the back for the sheer ingenuity of my work. Call it inspirational out of chaos. Bright claw rat, armed with venomous stingers, the deadly creation can fell creatures many times its own size, and even make humans writhe in pain at the taste of its claws. Wallflower rat, a devilishly flexibility than able to scale any surface with its special grip. This rodent is a daredevil of escapes and infiltrations. Web Reaver vermin, a hideous crossbreed, this chimera is born of skulk in the shadows and to weave of fell schemes. And as my new creation set out to find their niche in my dungeon, I noticed an old friend creeping through the doorway of the Everforest. End of chapter. Chapter 1.26. Allegiances. The silver fox had returned. Its sleek head appeared through the doorway of the Everforest. I sent a message for readiness and my bloodthirst to Mantis, eager to see their confrontation. The beast trotted into my dungeon, a spring in its step, and laid something on the front of its jaws on the rock. It was one of the Marquis's people, those half-man, half-insect creatures. A fairy, I suppose? I begrudged the use of the name of elegant fae on such an ungainly creatures. Their beady eyes and serrated cricket legs unnerved me. But this was a peace offering. Not only was the fox intelligent, it seemed to recognize that I was a dungeon and wanted goodwill with me. I deliberated. It cost me little to let the fox hunt in my dungeon. On the other hand, having an ally in the Everforest could be invaluable. I was not good at thinking diplomatically and putting grudges behind me. I preferred the absolute promise of revenge for any slight. But this time I could afford to let things go. It helped that the fox was quite aesthetically pleasing with its silver fur and single streak of red. I made flowers bloom as I ate the mana-dense corpse from the fairy, accepting this as a blessing of the fox trotted deeper into the gardens, shying away from my golems as she searched for food. There was an off chance she was a spy, so I made the decision to restrict her to the gardens, which the Marquis had already seen. I had other places my attention was needed, namely the mangrove orchard. The feeding frenzy had started, seeing so many golden fruit washed into the water. The poor, hopeless waiting on the shore had simply snapped. It was too much to see the riches thrown away while they slowly starved in poverty. They had dived into the water. My real fish, already battered and bruised from the conflict with the merfolk, were struggling to catch all the prey within the waters. The fishermen's spiders were even worse off, as people came rowing across to fight with crude spears and improvised clubs. But this was nothing and not a real threat, only a savage grasp for wealth. Humans were dying left and right, so that I wouldn't lose the souls and mana from the ones who perished beyond the islands. I made a snap decision. A hazy glow covered the water's surface, and suddenly thousands of water lilies appeared, draining my mana in its entirety to create a tightly woven covering over the lake. Within that space, my domain could spread outwards, catching the soul shards from the nearly dozen who died already. I ate until my mana was full again, and turned my attention away from the people dying on my shores. They were only distractions, not true contenders. If someone slipped away, I would only serve to encourage more to come. Human greed would make my orchards truthfully profitable. Already, I was more than halfway to my next expansion. Gemheart Dungeon Unnamed. Soul Fragments 288 out of 500. Mana 94 out of 132. Mana per hour 11.3. Anima 1. Logos 2. Arcana 3. Blessings. Gift of beauty, gift of the sun. Born in strange circumstances, this dungeon has exceeded its ability to invent strange and wondrous creations, and a vicious knack for survival. Woe betide any intruders, they will find no mercy. Ibar was unwrapped from his silk coffin, left shivering on the floor of the strange garden. He knew he was lucky to be alive. All around him were strange, bubbling shapes of glass, and it took him a minute to fear adult state to recognize them as mushrooms, round-capped and conical, ear-shaped and wisped-in. It was such a strange sight. Elbow would have believed he'd awakened in the face of the moon. A man made of clay stood over him. Elbow cringed back. The golem reached down, and he drew a squiggly, looping lines in the earth. Elbow knew what writing was, but, I can't read. The golem tilted its head, managing to convey a sigh despite lacking a mouth, or even a face beyond the single green eye. It reached out for Elbow in a way that made him scramble across the floor, and he's back, terrified. He had just lost his one chance. Wait, my people come from a dungeon. It made us because it wanted to become a god. And instead, the gods tore it down. Now we orcs are slaves, whipped, beaten, humiliated. We need a dungeon to shelter us. If you save us, we'll serve you for hundreds of generations. We're warriors, shamans. He was snorting between each word, his snout wet with fear and desperation. The golem seized him by the leg and dragged him towards the glass cage. The bars melted away, letting the clay man throw him inside. The jail slowly reformed, glass spiraling up in slow, molten motion. Ulbar shrunk to the edge of the cage and stared at the ceiling. He had failed. They should never have sent him. They should have sent his father, a true warrior, or the old shaman who always knew what to say. Anyone but him. A dungeon becoming a god. I'll admit I was intrigued. It would suit me, I think, godhood. I could be cruel and kind with a whim, and of course people would offer me gifts. It would be a good life. But even if I could let myself dream power-hungry dreams for a moment, I couldn't ignore one simple fact. It hadn't worked. All those grand ambitions had amounted to nothing more than an ignoble death and a handful of ugly pig humans. I would do well to remember the rather brutal lesson. As for the pig, I was curious still. Could he become a native of my dungeon? If he spent enough time absorbing the mana within my domain, would I be able to reshape him into something less hideous? I had a little interest in a pack of brutes roaming my dungeon uncontrolled, but if they could truly become my minions, I would have to reconsider. A large amount of my loyal brute muscle wasn't easy to turn down. For now, I simply didn't have time to devote to the snivelly little piglet. A silent market was about to begin. I hadn't had time to refresh my false markings and lead more fools astray, thanks to the incursion I just repelled, but I had plenty of sell and even more plans to put in motion. Oh yes, I had been thinking about the place in the world, and I needed to take control of the city above me. This vast hive of alien intelligences, all plotting and scheming, every one of them a threat to me. I needed to drop my fingers into the pot of intrigues that was Kulturn. The market would be my means of doing so. If I could seize control, I would have a base of operations that could spread my influence to the city above. And for that, I needed a large force that could serve me outside my dungeon. Originally, I had considered using golems, but it seemed that I was being offered exactly such a force, literally begging for me to make use of them in the orcs. How nicely things had turned out. For today, it would be a scouting expedition. Argent and her rats had finished gathering up the spoils of war, and they were rich. An aquamarine brooch had clasped the swordsman's cloak would stay with me, and the talisman that had bound me would be destroyed. Beyond that, I had acquired 3 purses full of pearls, a harpoon covered in scrimshaw symbols that seemed to weep a faint magical energy, a necklace of bright red coral, and a small statuette made of material that I couldn't name. Add to that the spoils of Olin's lab, and I had quite the embarrassment of stolen riches to dispose of. Adamant donned on his stolen garb, having to draw in his arms and legs now that he was considerably shorter. This time I would send the glass fawn with him, dressed, of course, in the spare set of clothes from Trivelin deceased men. Defend him, was my order. Together they set out. The market was in full swing by the time they arrived, with the dark figures bustling between the impromptu stalls. The intense quiet lent an immense and moody atmosphere to the flickering of torches and the arched ceilings above. And the slosh of the river filled the silence, the firelight reflecting on its rippling surface like a gleaming scales of a black snake. Adamant found a quiet corner amongst the junk sellers and laid out his cloak with numerous instruments we'd taken from Olin, with the golden staff he himself had carried out of the Institute, with the spoils from the Myr. There would have been exotic creatures to sell too, if I had the time. Since our raid on the Institute, time seemed to blur, so much had happened. The staff went almost immediately, bought with a full purse of coins, and a giddy disbelief of the buyer lifted it. I knew we'd been short-changed, but wouldn't bring myself to care. The bustle of the market was intoxicating, the clink of the iron coins and the swish of cloaks, punctuated as a dense silence. And, for a lack of sound, the sight seemed brighter, the gold and the riches on display given the spotlight. Silverware stolen from rich men's houses, clockwork wonders from the workshops above, swords and crossbows and other brute weapons lying alongside spell blades that had impeccable touch of a dwarven craftsmanship to them. Jewels, of course, glittering on the rings and chains or rough and fresh from the mines. One stall sold the strange grey flowers that crumbled into smoke as the buyers leaned down and pulled them to their masks and inhaled them, the roiling cloud of pale white fog sliding up their nostrils, making them sway on their feet as they walked away. Women who wore very little as their masks sauntered by. The necromancer in a pale white robe demonstrated the strength of his undead brutes, having them lift weights and mock fight with clubs with crowds' amusement. A little breathing ring had sprung up around the dead fights, and the wagers were soon joined by dice and cards, the seller of wines pouring out cups for the eager crowd. Yes, I wanted to own this. There was something delightful for this dark society with their masks and capes. The theatre of it all was delicious. And then the man stepped into my view, making angry hand signs, his face obscured by the feathered mask. "Where did you get this?" he demanded in a silent thief speak, jabbing his finger towards Odin's instruments. Before I could give the glass warning to deal with him, a loud, braying voice called out, magically amplified by the boon across the market. A fool in jester's clothes and a red mask had clambered high atop one of the stalls, balancing on one's leg as he cupped his hands over his mouth and shouted, "Ladies and gentlemen, a moment of your time. 5 days from today a special market will be held. The key event, for which we've called a rare occasion, will be an auction. All manner of things shall be sold, but king among the prizes will be bought. Will be living a unicorn. Yes, a live and healthy unicorn, its horn still intact. So come one, come all. The silent auction shall be a show of wonders." End of chapter. 1.27 Honor among Thieves. 5 days. Whispers were spreading through the market, replacing the quiet and low sea of murmur, gossiping, and speculation. The guards made no move to enforce the rule of silence. This mood was exactly what they wanted out of the announcement. Anticipation, greed, rumors moving faster than truths. A deadline had just been set on my schemes for this market. 5 days to swoop in and steal the prize, and in the process humiliate their prancing pirate captain who ran the place. The man in front of me, angered by the clean ambivalence to his existence, seized Adamant's collar. "Where did you get those?" he hissed under his breath. To his surprise, a grip like iron clamped down around his wrists. Fingers made of earth and stone pressed down until the bone beneath began to grind and bend. He whimpered, drawing attention from the nearby crowd. Lifting up his free hand, Adamant signed, "I stole them, and going to buy something?" As Squeezed informed him that he wasn't a question, letting out a pained squeak, he dropped the coin purse, scooping up a ticking device like a compass, and retreating as soon as Adamant released his hand. The rest of the market ticked by as I schemed, keeping a tendril of my attention on Adamant to puppeteer him through the motions of sales of people as they snapped up the pearls and their assorted magical gimmicks. As he played shopkeep, Argent crept out of his robes, disappearing into the bustle of the market. I followed in spirit as she navigated her way across gangplanks and mooring ropes towards the barge where the pirate prince held court. Today a fiddler soared a fiery tune as a woman and veils of red danced, their clothes swirling away from them as they spun and stomped their bare feet, chains of golden coins bouncing off their taut stomachs and wide hips. Various riches and overweight merchants lounged in reclining couches, eating at the plates and carried by slaves. The pirate prince danced amongst them, a hand around her waist, an arm around her shoulder. The spurs of his tall black boots jingled. We scampered aboard on heels of a tall man with an ermine-lined cloak and black hooked-nosed mask. Everything about the stride screamed anger. We scrambled upon the railing to watch. The newcomer stormed through the dancers, pushing them aside, and seized the pirate by the lapels of his long coat. "You brat! That unicorn was promised to the cormorants! You swore on your mother's grave!" Spittle landed on the pirate's face. He casually wiped it off of his cheek, cleaning his hand over the other man's shoulder. "My mother told sweet lies for coin. She'd be so proud." The man dropped him, disgusted. Or maybe he noticed the boatload of men edging closer, hands on their swords, their bludgeons, and their short, brutal knives. They relaxed as the pirate waved them all to back away, a smile on his face, but not, I noticed, in his eyes. "I'll make it up to you, of course I will, but listen." He spread out his arms wide to the market and its assortment of ships, all bobbing in the river's currents. "It's best for all of us honest folk if someone like me is in charge, and not some joyous dwarf, some savage river folk. I need gold for that, and I need that kind of gold to buy a city. And God knows the Cormorants can't offer that. We offered you loyalty." The man wasn't buying a word of the pretty little speech. "Loyalty, I'm afraid, isn't quite gold and gems. It doesn't spend the same," the pirate said, and the Captain Imar, I remembered, turned his back, shrugging the accusation off. It was an open provocation, but not one the man was dumb enough to take. His fingers drummed on the pommel of his rapier, but he didn't draw. "The next time we meet, it won't be in words, Imar." So he wasn't good at keeping allies, and he was dumb enough to make enemies and let them walk away alive. I was waiting for other shoe to drop. What kept this preening ponce on his throne? "Ah, the kitten tries to growl. If I was afraid of you, I'd have killed you already. We both know that." Imar just waved him off. The man stormed back down the gangplank, leaving the atmosphere behind him bruised and upset, the dancers frozen and afraid. "All of you, don't I pay you to dance?" the pirate prince snapped, and caught one of them by the wrist. He turned her face up and pressed a golden coin into her palm. "You, go give this to our friend." "Who?" She managed to ask the question through her shaking. "Why, the ratty sitting over there." The fingers pinched her cheeks, turning her face towards us, watching us all argue. We froze, so did the girl. Imar swatted her forward, and she carefully stepped towards us, holding out a coin as far as one herself could be. Argent seized control and threw herself overboard. Behind us the gold flashed. The thin and sour manna in the air was pulled towards it like gravity. In the blink of an eye, the woman's hand withered into a wrinkled claw of a crone 3 times her age, a cry of pain leaving her lips. We landed in the surf below as Imar rushed to the tide, laughing a wild laugh. He scattered the coins across his pockets into the air. We went under as the coins hit the water. Silver gleamed in the last flashing of light as it sank towards the dark beds of the river's green waters. I felt the manna within Argent being pulled towards them, each piece of silver like a greedy whirlpool drinking in the flow of manna all around, letting nothing escape. Her inner fire was pulled from her in a blazing streams of light, and there was nothing that I could do. She couldn't even teleport. But she wasn't alone now. She drew on her very tiny sparks of mana with dozens of rats as she kicked up. The market, there were countless, lurking in the gutters, chewing cast-off food, and some of them died, overdrawn, and others kicked and scratched at nothing to blind spasms of pain. But the web of connections between them held, feeding her the strength to pull free and rise up out of the draining fields around the sinking coins. We surfaced, Argent gasping. A crossbow bolt slapped the water next to us. Grasping the hull of the nearby boat, we flashed up to the top of the railings before the bowman could reload. We were gone. Darting amongst the feet of the crowd, we were impossible to trace. In mere moments, taking routes no human could follow, we were back beneath Adamant's cloak, soaking wet and gasping for breath. Argent was faster now. She was far improved. Today we had learned his abilities. I'd promised I'd use that knowledge to slit his throat soon enough. 5 days. Our goods were gone, sold, our purse heavy. We rose before anyone could trace Argent back to the anonymous merchant in the dingy side of the market. Making our way back through the alchemist district, there we had purchases to make. We bought a night lantern with a dark flame and it drank up the nearby light. A contained vial of quick-burning phosphorescent solution. I considered touted healing potion, wondering if it could help Aurum, but then I knew better than to listen to the promises of a miracle healer. Miracles. There was something to that. A god? even a messenger could heal a rum. More than my own forgiveness, it was worth pursuing their favor for his sake. If it was to heal my guardian, I'd even accept making a gift of the unicorn itself. Surely a goddess of beauty would appreciate that. As we shuffled out of the market, I spotted 3 familiar figures huddled together in argument. I wondered how Isis was doing. Honestly, I'd have to expect our contract to compel me to save him by now. Another! Isis lifted up his glass and demanded wine as fairy attendants massaged his back. A fresh scar crossed his face, a wound swollen purple, bloating his lips where it crossed his mouth. He had dueled with the dire scorpion today. Tomorrow his opponent would be a blood-spine lizard. His adoring audience would go wild to see him vanquish the beast. All his life Isis had been small, the one getting kicked around and ignored. Here he was a giant, a mammoth of a man. The earth shook where he stepped. When the Marquis condemned Isis to die in the fighting pits, he never realized what a favor he was doing to the homunculus. Here he was adored for his strength, feared for his savagery. They called him the Goliath and cheered his name with fanatic enthusiasm. Between each fight there was a wine of rivalry. Best of all, there was the furious look on the Marquis's face as his pet beasts failed to kill Isis time and time again. With the crowd howling the name of Goliath, what could he do but allow Isis to bow and take his rewards, and scheme up an even deadlier fight tomorrow? Sometimes Isis wondered how things were getting on back in the dungeon, but then he was far above the paltry place now. End of chapter. Chapter 1.28 Delve. I needed to work quickly. I needed to make certain that the unicorn was mine, and I needed to reinforce my position against the invaders that were no doubt coming on the heels of the last incursion. One dwarf had gotten away, carrying the secrets of my dungeon with him, and the merfolk's failure to return would be a sure signal that they had found me. Thankfully, I had tools to work with. Within the amber chrysalis, the mind of the jeweler spider had begun to still. The melding of the souls had completed, and its dreams had ceased to be frantic nightmares of skittering legs and carapaces covered bodies, but evened out, mellowing the languid thoughts of the glimmering webs and glittering diamonds. It was ready time to evolve. Your creation is undergoing evolution. During this time, mana you give them will be more effective, and they will be easier to shape. Choose a path. Arachne, common. Caught halfway between a man and a spider, this solitary creature lives a cursed existence but produces breathtaking art. Sword tarantula, common. With 8-bladed limbs and armor as thick as hairs, the sword tarantula is a terrifying foe that can slaughter common warriors. Crystal spider, rare. Beautiful and cunning creatures, crystal spiders secrete dazzling and razor-sharp crystals that they use to prepare traps for their prey. Fate weaver, attuned to the weave of destiny itself, a highly intelligent and reclusive breed can manifest oracular powers. Cavern lurker mutant, absorbs traits from the last foe defeated, gains corrosive spit and forelimbs adapted to digging. The choice was easy enough. Only Fate Weaver and Arachne played to the strengths of the reincarnated jeweler. While the Fate Weaver was dearly alluring, Arachne, a half-human, half-spider, fit the state of the strange creature's hybrid soul precisely. Selecting that choice, I watched as the amber light began to expand, swelling to fit the much larger creature. The silhouette of the spider encased within began to stretch and distort, going through transformations that would have been hideous to experience if not for the soothing effects of the chrysalis. It was a power I had only begun to imitate by my own modifications. I turned to the next on my list. The fisherman spider had less interesting choices, Lurelum and Busher, adding a luminescent lure to the anglerfish and strengthening her webs, useful in nature but not so much against adventurers. Dire Widow, a large and venomous breed, and Harpoon Spider, adapting to hurl the spear of bone and skewer its enemies. Swarm Queen, which would produce massive quantities of tiny, ravenous children, threatening to devastate my ecology. Tradesman's recluse, an intelligent breed with skills to make basic tools, was interesting but didn't solve the immediate problem. In the end, I chose the harpoon spider. It solved the basic problem fishermen spiders faced, being too slow and clumsy to properly engage the enemy, by massively increasing their range. With a few of these sprinkled into the swarm, their effectiveness at harassing the forces would skyrocket. Two vastly improved servants 2 steps towards my goal, descent. My only route forward as a dungeon was down, and I felt excited to begin a new layer. I began to work out a third front. The mangrove orchard lacked a proper defender, even its true contender like the merfolk attempted to invade from the flank. But I had acquired a shark-tooth necklace from Trivelin, and while I was a saltwater creature, I finally felt confidence in my ability to change that. Mana roiled in concentration as I began to create. Blots of condensed magic from the air and slowly pulled inwards, shaped like clay to form a long, sleek silhouette, the primal image of a graceful terror. But I had more to do. I began to weave in aspects of the mutant lamprey Aurum had vanquished so long ago, using its biology as a base for adapting the shark to fresh water. In the process, it gained several more eyes and a long trailing tendrils that followed the line of its tail. It was a strange beauty to look at, but to be sure, but a beauty nonetheless. I had made its skin translucent, allowing the pump and pulse of the organs beneath to shine through with a faint glow of bioluminescence, imbuing the creature's visible skeleton with a golden tint. With the trailing tendrils and a single fin, it looked like a horror from the deepest depths of the ocean. Just like that, I knew what I'd name it, Abyssal Shark. Brought about by the chimeric methods, the strange creature is imbued with an endless hunger and a beautiful elegance. I had changed its instincts too. This shark would happily slumber in the mud at the lake bottom, rising only to breathe on occasion, until blood filled the water. Only then would it rise up and attack, only when someone tried to force their way through and filled the lake with carnage like the merfolk had. I didn't want to discourage the poor fools on the lakeshore to coming to seek the fortune, after all, and the sight of the beast rising from beneath would certainly be, striking. Oh yes, I could safely be proud of myself here. With that, I felt my work was largely complete. It only had been a few weeks since I'd first awoken, but I had reshaped my domain into a thing of beauty. To the east there was a mangrove orchard, countless water lilies blooming with pink flowers covered the water, rising and falling with the faint waves as the trees rose on spidery, thin hills of roots, gold in their branches, and silk billowing in the huge nets of their trunks. The bronze metallic reelfish and the fat grey fisherman spiders presided over this district. To the west there was the ravine, topped with a jungle of glass beams where spiders threw their webs and bright-bodied birds nested. The steep, unsteady sides of the chasm were home to countless more spiders, and descended down into the tropical humidity of the green jungle. One would find their way barred by the spore-backed sloths, who spread fecund and poisonous mushrooms wherever they roamed in their slow way. Either way, one would reach the gardens, a land of glass mushrooms, glass cages, and deadly surprises. In the ceiling above lived a colony of nacre spiders, hunting by ambush. To see them attack was to see a flash of pearl-covered limbs slice through the flesh like butter. Their adolescents hunted on the ground below. There was only space for a dozen or so adults, and so coming of age meant challenging one for the spot in the nests. A brutal and bloody affair that kept the herd strong. Hidden in the grass, mantises, lurking vipers, poisonous toadstools, all conspired to claim the life of the unwary. The snakes poured in from secret chambers to the south, the tunnel only small enough for them to pass through. Beyond was the secret feeding grounds that ensured that we never ran short of deadly serpents, connected by vertical burrows to the chamber of Aurum below, their predecessor and king. Beneath the gardens wound numerous labyrinth tunnels, all of them flooded and teeming with real fish. If someone somehow navigated those muddy passages, they would find themselves in an underwater arena, facing a rum as he's slithering forth from his den. Even now, I believed that he would come to protect me if the invaders ever got that far. Finally, there was the sanctum, that beautiful and dazzling corridor that had been my first creation. Moss the color of black glass and luminous mushrooms patterned the double helix slide of the walls, concealing razor-sharp ridges beneath an endless slippery coat of lichens, making it all but impossible to climb. Lethal centipedes crawling from hidden caves to feast on the opalescent beetles. Above it all, a cavern entrance shaped like the mouth of a beast loomed, its jaws parted, its teeth on display. I would miss my cozy little nest atop the dungeon. Now it would only be a host to a token of soul, the golden coin that was a fragment of the sun god's blazing luck. But there was an itch in the back of my mind, a paranoid urge that I couldn't stave off much longer. I couldn't truly feel safe and satisfied unless I was constantly moving down, armoring myself behind even more deadly traps and creations. It was the urge to delve deeper into the stone foundations of the world, to vanish from the world of light and into my underground realm, to work wonders beneath the earth that nobody would ever see. It was time to begin on a fresh canvas. The first of the Arachne awoke in a daze. He remembered many things that didn't make sense together. He remembered his mother singing his lullabies. He remembered killing his mother in a duel for her nest, the feel of the jaws crunching through her carapace. He remembered having teeth and having mandibles, having 8 legs and having 2. He clutched his face with his 8-fingered hands. Even that was alien to him. The shape was smooth, hardened by black chitin, but with soft flesh between. Not quite human, not quite spider. It sloped backwards in a great bulbous knot of chitin wadded onto the back of his skull. Unsteady, he stepped forwards, 8 legs. A body shaped like a spider, but with a human torso rising where the head should be. The skin was black as charcoal, the hands covered in a shiny carapace. He was in a strange garden. On all sides impossible growths bloomed. "Come here." A voice was speaking to him. The Arachne laughed, a strange sound that hissed and chittered over his tongue, though his twitching mandibles. He must be going mad. Anyone would. A door opened in the walls, and a stone smoothly dissolving into nothing. The Arachne felt compelled forward, through the gateway into a room where the floor dropped away into a deep pool and the ceiling lifted away, the tunnel running overhead. His thin, dexterous legs easily carried him up the walls, thousands of tiny hairs anchoring him, despite the slimy muck clinging to them. The centipedes that wound around his legs could nothing to stop him. There was a place where stalactites pressed together in a ring that resembled a horrific mouth. The Arachne rose through it into the dark chamber. By the light of the blazing shard of gold, he saw the most beautiful gem lying on a small pedestal. The light seemed to twist around, drawn in scintillating ribbons of rainbow towards a minuscule green jewel. "Carry me." Lifting the gem like it was a pure, more precious than life, the Arachne took it down from the secret place, the door closing back into the blank stone wall behind them. The first step of the stairway formed into a floor of the garden. An invisible force was digging itself into the rock. As he set foot in it, another one was carved away from the stone floor. With each step, he was led in a spiraling path, a tunnel cutting through the earth in front of him. Soon there was a stone overhead, stone on all sides, and a sour air with a smell of the underground. The light vanishing behind him as he followed the spiral stairway. "Where are we going?" the newborn guardian asked. "Deeper." End of chapter. And that concludes this batch video. I hope that you enjoyed. If you wish to support the channel, there are numerous ways to do so down below. Until next time, I hope that you all have a good one. And I'll see you all in the next video. Cheers.